So you finally saved up enough money to buy yourself your DSLR or mirrorless camera. You take it out the box, charge up those batteries, slap that lens on it, turn it on, and something's not right. This doesn't look like it's worth $500 or more. What the heck? Yeah, there's much more to it than just turning on a camera. Today I'm going to be showing you guys how to use the basics of manual exposure to make your videos and photos look crispy. Hello, my name is Renee and welcome to my channel. So I want to start this video by making sure you guys know that there's absolutely nothing wrong with leaving your camera settings on auto. Leaving your camera settings on auto mode is actually really useful when you're just starting out because, well, it gets the job done. When I first got a camera, I actually had no idea there was such a thing as manual setting. And even once I found out, I was too intimidated by the weird, crazy numbers to actually try getting into manual. I'm not a mathematician, sorry. But if you want to take the next step to make your content look more professional, then stick around for the end because today I'm going to be showing you guys how to use the exposure triangle. So the exposure triangle is the common association between three different variables that determine exposure. Or in layman's terms, it's basically the lighting of your footage or photo. The three variables that make up the exposure triangle are aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. So aperture, which is a fancy way to say hole, is an opening in the camera that allows light to pour into the sensor. Think of it like the camera's eye. Light enters through the lens eye and determines how much light is being let into the sensor. This element also determines how much depth of field your lens will provide. Or in other words, it's basically what makes your background look all nice and blurry. So again, as your aperture becomes bigger, more light is being let in and your depth of field increases. On your camera settings, this element will be represented by the letter F followed by a number. As that number on your settings becomes smaller and smaller, your aperture increases. I know that's kind of confusing and it doesn't make sense. If the number is getting smaller, wouldn't the aperture get smaller as well? But no, as that number on your settings becomes smaller, your aperture opens up and becomes bigger. I want to keep this video as simple as possible, so I'm not going to get into the details as to why it's represented by an F or any of the mathematics that goes into stops of light. But if you're feeling adventurous, I'm gonna go ahead and leave a link down below in the description. That way you guys can check out this website that explains all of this information more in depth. By the way, quick tip, if you're looking to buy a lens, the maximum aperture capabilities of that specific lens can be found right after the brand and focal length. So same concept, as that number gets smaller, the more light that lens is able to receive, as well as the more expensive that lens is, unfortunately. So now we're gonna talk about shutter speed. Shutter speed is a variable of time, and it's basically how long your sensor is being exposed to light. So essentially, the longer that your sensor is being exposed, the more light will be let in, which sounds pretty good, except this time around, that's probably not the best thing you want to do. Shutter speed also determines how well your subject is being shot in a video or photo. So if you're shooting something that's moving really fast, then you also want to set your shutter speed fast. This exposure element is usually represented by seconds or dividends of a second and is usually right next to your aperture. Quick tip about shutter speed. Shutter speed is much more noticeable in photography when you are trying to shoot something really fast. For example, let's say that you are trying to have a family jump up in the air and capture them mid-air. If your shutter speed isn't set at the right amount, then all of those people are going to look super blurry. As a general rule of thumb, I recommend that you set your shutter speed setting at least double what your focal length is. So if you're shooting photography on a 50mm lens, then I would recommend to set your shutter speed at least 1/100th of a second. And as far as video goes, that's a little bit easier. Whatever your frame rate is for that project, you want to make sure that your shutter speed is double your frame rate. So if you're filming a video at 24 frames per second, then go ahead and set your settings at 1/50th of a second. And if you're shooting at 60 frames per second for that sweet slow-mo, then go ahead and set your shutter speed at 1/125th of a second. By the way, if your camera doesn't have the exact settings, then go ahead and set it to the next closest thing. And if you prefer your footage or video to look a little bit more blurry, just to add some special effect, then go ahead, there's nothing wrong with that. And last but not least, we have the ISO, which by the way is my personal enemy. So basically, ISO is a variable that determines how sensitive your camera sensor is to light. On your camera settings, ISO is usually represented by a number that starts somewhere around 100. The higher that ISO goes, the less light is needed to set your exposure. Some cameras actually have a huge range of ISO and perform really well under low light conditions. It sounds too good to be true, right? Well, that's because it is too good to be true. The general caveat surrounding ISO is that as that number gets higher and higher, your image quality gets lower and lower. What the heck? But it's honestly not that big of a deal anymore, especially with cameras like Sony that perform extremely well in low light conditions. Quick tip on ISO, as a general rule, try to keep your ISO as low as possible to maintain that quality, but just keep in mind that there's no point in having a photo or video that is extremely well quality if you can't even see your subject. Duh. So now that we've learned the 3 basic principles of the exposure triangle, the next thing to try to understand is that as you change one element of the exposure triangle, you'll need to adjust the rest of them to expose your setting correctly. The true skill of a videographer or photographer really shows whenever they are capable of exposing an image correctly. But as I usually do, I want to remind you guys that there's no official guide as to what makes a scene visually stunning. I want you guys to take in all the information that I have provided in today's video and then throw in your own creativity and style, that way you can find the perfect scene for you. But that's pretty much it. I hope I was able to teach you guys something on the exposure triangle. If I did, please make sure to let me know down below in the comments. Again, this video might only cover just the basics of exposure, but it's also a huge leap forward in your knowledge of cameras. So good job. If you want to watch more content like this, make sure to subscribe and do whatever you guys do down there. But thanks for watching. I will catch you guys next time. Bye.